Conversations with the Mind podcast, where we explore consciousness through conversations with interesting people. Our mission is to engage the collective mind piece by piece to bring greater clarity of mind to our listeners locally and across the planet, and to contribute to broaden the shared experiential knowledge and wisdom of existence. Okay, folks, welcome back to Conversations with the Mind. I'm your host, Shane Lamaster, and you are in the right place. This is episode 101, and we are here with very special guest, Shivani Kaushik, fellow classmate of mine. How are you today?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. You are lucky to be out of Colorado right now. It is extremely hot outside, and I hate the heat. So I don't know what it's like right now in Vancouver, Canada, but in Colorado, I'm miserable with the heat. So I'm staying indoors.
No, it's sadly, well, not sadly, but it is hot. It's quite humid. And unfortunately, as I'm sure, Colorado experiences as well, the air quality definitely not at its best with all of the fires going on. But personally speaking, I am very still excited to be home in Canada. It was quite, well, at least for me, a bit of a wait and quite a journey, but one that I have great gratitude for. So yeah, no, definitely happy to be here, but also having an opportunity to connect with you. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I definitely want to hear your stories of, the struggles. I heard bits and pieces throughout the last couple of years, the struggles in trying to get back home across the border. So I'm sure that's quite the endeavor and quite the story. But the first question that I ask is the same question that I ask to every guest. And that is, the podcast is called Conversations with the Mind. And so I'm wondering, what does that phrase mean to you? When you hear the phrase conversations with the mind, how does that resonate? What sort of imagery comes up for you? Just how do you make sense of that phrase?
Wow, that's a great question. I think where my mind goes, because this is an idea that resonates quite heavily with me and one that I've encountered quite almost endlessly, actually, within my work, is an intentional journey, I think, to seek your own happiness. I think when you kind of put yourself at the forefront, and instead of living to others' expectations, you get a good understanding of what sort of your hopes and your dreams are. But to do that, I think you really have to get in tune with yourself, with oneself. And to do that, I think is, exploring your mind, your body, your soul, everything that, connects you to make you, the human being that you are today. So that's interesting. I think, my mind first went to seeking happiness. And the reason I think, again, that resonates so heavily is within my work. I'm not sure if you'll explain. And when talk about, how people are at the end of life, and I hate to say, like, if they have any sort of regrets, if they kind of come to light at that time, and the biggest one is that they lived a life to make other people happy, and that's quite, a heavy sentiment to be sitting with, especially at the end of life, knowing there's no rewind button and you can't redo it. But that's something that they almost hope that, sort of pass this along, if you're going to educate others, is that you have every right to happiness, however it looks. At least my golden rule is, as long as you're kind to yourself and others, you're doing it right. But not to let others define that. And how else will you know what it is to you unless, again, you kind of have that conversation with yourself. So
Nice.
That's how I would, respond to that wonderful question in a nutshell.
What a great answer too. And I hear it all the time, and you're probably more up to date on the actual stats as far as people at the end of life, and when asked what they regret, how many of them say they regret living their life, to please others, or not following their own dreams. But I feel like that's You're absolutely right. Like that's the point of this existence on this planet, is to pursue your own dreams, to pursue your own happiness. And so many people, including myself in the past and still sometimes currently, like struggle with define number one, like defining like what makes me happy and how do I pursue that, but also you like getting into that groove and sort of shutting out the judgment or expectations of other people, because we live in such a social communal type society that it's hard to snap yourself out of that mode where you really care about what other people think and just go after whatever makes you happy regardless of what other people think. So what would you say to me and to the audience listening out there? Like, how does someone do that? How does someone sort of disregard the
Mhm.
opinions or expectations of others and really dig into their own happiness?
Gosh, I mean, sadly, my mind would go to the fear of like your mortality. Like you really just don't know how long you have on this earth. And yeah, it's a scary notion to know that we are in charge of our own happiness. We cannot let other people define it. We can't even let, we do our best not to be influenced by the people that we love, even though they might have the best intentions for us. That this is our duty, and again, it's not selfish to put yourself at the forefront, and I think it's just easy to kind of do that these days, especially if you have a lot of responsibility. I can speak to this, I think, in a way more freely because I am a single woman. I'm not married. I don't have children. I can pick up at a drop of a hat, or at least, at one time I could. And at the end of the day, my responsibility is only to myself. So I do understand, like, this is also a lot easier said than done. But if you know that you are doing something without the intention of harming somebody, their feelings or their expectations of you, then right, you should be able, I'm hoping, to give yourself permission to do, again, just simply what makes you happy. And again, going back to the work that I did at end of life, like it would be down to even something of like what kind of car they purchased. They saved up, they always wanted that dream car, but due to this or that, they ended up going for something a bit more practical. And that's just something that, again, just resonates with them as like a woulda, coulda, shoulda. So it's, why not at sometimes just go for it? Like, and this is like a really silly example, but I personally don't have any tattoos. And I, from afar, certainly have admired yours. And I understand, like, this is a wonderful way that people have expressed themselves. And, people are saying, oh, well, it's permanent and this and that. And it's just like, well, who cares? It's like their body. And if this is like a wonderful form of expression for them, they have one life and this is what they choose to do with it. Like, why would you care so much about how, what somebody chooses to do, to their own body, which they have absolute right to? So it's just like small things that gradually, build up, and all of a sudden you turn around and you realize, right, this is a life that was paid for me by a bunch of other people that didn't have to live it. um, yeah, at the end of the day, these are your choices, and hopefully you have people that are supportive and walking alongside you in this journey and not feeling like they're in front of you trying to pull you or behind you trying to push you, again, going at a pace that doesn't feel comfortable to you, or again, making decisions that you didn't envision for yourself. So we should never live with regret. There's always something to learn from it, but you just don't want, again, people that aren't in your skin to define, who you are, essentially. Because I
Mm.
think how you seek happiness is very much a part of, yeah, what's a part of your soul.
Yeah, a few things came up for me there. One about the tattoos, like I think I've heard that so many times, but it's permanent. Aren't you gonna regret it when you're older? And I went in with a clear mind, knowing full well that a tattoo is permanent. Like that's why I got it. Like I want it on me forever to remind me of the things that it means. So that's a plus thing for me. I don't want a tattoo that's gonna
But
wash
I'm
off.
like, out of curiosity, like, have you had people be like, oh, Shane, what about like when you want to get a job, like, you can't have the, like it's been shown, or, just sort of things that, right, at the time you probably, and you shouldn't even today like care. But again, it's just that, what about other people? What about, what if they think? And it's like, this is my body and this is what I aim to do.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I have had a lot of people
Sorry to
me-
interrupt you there.
no, it's all right. I've had a lot of people ask me about the job piece. And I have a couple answers. First, like, I'll go to some job interviews and cover my tattoos because I don't want others to judge me based off of how I look. I want them to judge me based off of my work and hire me that way. And then I'll show them the tattoos, and usually it's a big surprise. Other times, I won't wear long sleeves, and my attitude going into the interview is that if you don't accept me for who I am right off the bat, then I don't want to work for you anyway. Then you're too close-minded,
Exactly.
and I don't want to be around you. Um,
Yeah.
so, and then there's this other piece, right? Like, and it's a part of me holding back a little bit, but I've always wanted a neck tattoo, so like right on my neck. And even if you wear a suit or something, like that shows, so
Yeah.
I've made a deal with myself that I'm going to hold off on getting the full neck tattoo until after I get the PhD. And then after I get the PhD, then that's my graduation gift to myself, is to get my full neck tattoo, because after that, like, the doors open up and people are more focused on your work than they are on who, what you look like or anything like that. So
Right.
another
Yeah.
thing came up when you were talking about that. And so you're talking about pursuing your happiness, and you said something really important that I think was just it was said really briefly, and I just want to focus in on it a little bit. And you said, as long as you're not hurting other people, you should be able to pursue your happiness, right? And earlier when you
Yeah.
when you were talking about this, what came to my mind was like, well, what about those people out there, you know, CEOs, people who, politicians, people who step on others in order to pursue their happiness and get ahead in life. um, what about those people? Like, aren't they following their dreams and following their happiness as well, and shouldn't they be allowed to do that? But then you mentioned like not doing harm to others. And I think there's a line there too, because I certainly don't like anybody infringing on my own happiness or my own ability to pursue my happiness. I don't like government entities telling me what I can and cannot put in my body. I don't like laws telling me, how I can pursue my happiness. And yet we still have, restrictions on consciousness. We have restrictions on how we can explore ourselves. We have all sorts of these restrictions on how people can pursue their happiness. And so that always gets me a little bit. Just wondering what you think about, others pursuing their happiness where maybe they are doing some harm to other people and maybe they don't care. And then also
Again, it
restrictions.
comes down, yeah, it just comes down again to how you define it, because these individuals have, yeah, could be pursuing this type of happiness, but having no, comprehension of, right, of how their actions are, harming more vulnerable populations. At the same time, they could have absolutely, right, every understanding of what they're doing and still, continue to do what they're doing. Um, I don't know, again, I can only imagine the different types of thoughts that people have at the end of life, as much as I have seen, gosh, how many people, pass. I've never come across two conversations that have been the same. So again, it just goes down to the uniqueness of that experience, and what it conjures up for you. But I've heard, countless experiences, and experienced a few of myself, where people divulge a lot at the end of life, because it's interesting, they could have been, non-religious their whole life, or even an atheist, and all of a sudden something happens at the end of life where they feel like they have to repent, or absolve themselves of something that they did in the past, because they're fearful of where they're going to next. And even like just with no warning, all of a sudden family members are learning, these deep dark secrets or these skeletons that they didn't know existed, because this person, at the end of life has to free themselves and is, so to speak, and doesn't want the fear of, again, carrying that to where they might anticipate where they're going. So, that's, again, really interesting. I can say it as a social worker, like, oh gosh, yeah, how dare these people? But at the same time, right, they have free will. They walk this earth too. And right, they're seeking a happiness that at least at this time, fits well for them. Who knows if that's going to be there forever, though.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that I could have you on the podcast today, because I don't think I've ever had a guest on the show who spends so much of their own waking conscious life focusing on, and thinking about death and mortality and end of life issues. Especially, I mean, you're so young, and you and you're just like, you surround yourself with these end of life things. And as you talk about it, and I'm sure the listeners are getting this too, but as I hear you talk about it, most of my thoughts are thinking about people who are older in age, like older aged folks in their
Mhm.
70s and 80s, who are dying of natural or unnatural causes, whatever, but older in life. And the truth about mortality and end of life is that we don't know when it's going to end. It can end at any moment. And so I've read some of these studies in which you're talking about, like, people repenting at the end of life and sharing some of their deepest, darkest secrets to get it off their chest. Well, shouldn't we be doing that anyway? Like, even when we're not older in age, because we don't know when the end is coming, and if you're so worried about what's going to happen after you die, like, that could happen in the next 5 minutes. So why not just be truthful and honest and transparent all the time with as many people as you can, and really focus on what's important in this life, like relationships and things like that, instead of waiting until your 70s or 80s to do that, right?
Yeah, exactly. But you get really good at convincing yourself that you'll never have to cross that bridge, right? Until you get there. So, but at the same time, I think for every one person that might be sharing a deep, dark secret, there's one that also takes it with them.
Mm.
So again, since we don't really know what happens when we die, who knows, where that information goes. But yeah, the ramifications are quite incredible, because right, once you disclose that, to your family member, I've seen this happen where, a mom told something to their daughter and then they pass, and now it's left for this, the daughter to now kind of carry this secret. It's we talk about a lot about how at the end of life, our loved ones who are passing often leave us with these final gifts. But that's one that's I don't know if I would classify, necessarily as a gift. It becomes a burden. So like you mentioned, if you have this time to explain and give reassurance and comfort while you can, please do so, because right, tomorrow is never guaranteed to us. But we are a culture that does like to learn the hard way. So it's like not until we are faced with that do we really, will we really be open and honest with the feelings that accompany death and end of life.
Mm. So here's a totally non-scientific question for you. What do you think?
Wonderful.
Yeah, what do you think happens after we die? Like, what is your personal beliefs around that?
Gosh, I it's a wonderful thought, like to think like, I don't necessarily believe, I definitely don't believe in heaven and hell. I'll say that. But I'd like to think you get to go somewhere where you don't harbor the same kind of stress and ill feelings or whatnot that you had on this life. I think it's an incredibly freeing experience, almost like something just kind of bursts out of you, where it's like, I'm not carrying this where I'm going next, because that's just going to be a very lovely experience for me. Um, But the what I love is actually what Keanu Reeves once said. He did an interview on Colbert, and Colbert asked him, like, what do you think happens when people die? And he provided such a marvelous response that the people that love you will miss you. And that was just so marvelous because, yeah, that is the one thing that is guaranteed, is that you will be missed. That's just the only thing that we know really happens when people pass. But one way that I kind of talk about this, especially with people who are grieving, because it kind of helps them sort of wrap their head around it, is because we don't know, because science hasn't proven everything, which is wonderful. It gets to be whatever you want it to be. So, conjure up that creativity, think of that person, what would have been heaven, or a wonderful place to go after life for this individual, and you have every right to. So it's just a very freeing experience. I think it's one of those mysteries that I should remain a mystery. If I can go on a bit of a tangent, one of my very first clients that I had when I did bereavement work was a very young guy. He was 17 years old, and he just lost his mom to cancer. It was a very quick loss, but she had enough time, luckily, to pass in hospice. And so he, was of course devastated when she passed. And so we had a few sessions. And one day he came in and he was just a lot lighter in his step and his words and just how he looked. And so I inquired, kind of what happened. And he told me he had a dream about her, that she came to visit him, that she reassured him that she was somewhere magical, but he wasn't allowed to know where she was until it was his turn. And he just completely accepted. It's sort of like you have earned this membership to a club, that you didn't necessarily want to join, but there you are. And you can't know, again, the destination or location until it's your time. So I like kind of thinking that way, that it's not something I need to know. When it's my time, maybe I'll figure it out at that point. But until then, let it, sort of drive you, because you think there is, a heaven and a hell. Like, be good because you want to be a good person, not because you think you're going to be rewarded in the afterlife. Like, again, that has not been proven. So, yeah.
No, I love that. And, I don't necessarily believe in a heaven or hell as like a destination, a place that you go. Even though, a lot of my belief system is based around Buddhism, and Buddhists do talk about, different realms or different dimensions of reality, some being God realms, some being hell realms, some being realms of addiction, some being realms of animal, animal incarnations, things like that. So in some way, I do believe that it is possible to be, and I believe in rebirth and things like that, and reincarnation. So I do believe that you can be reborn into different types of places or different animals or plants or whatever. But as
Yeah.
far as heaven and hell goes, like, it's not proven that these are destinations, but, I think we all know, and we can prove anecdotally, that you can create your own heaven or your own hell here on earth in your
Absolutely. Yeah.
existence, right? And so that I do believe in. I do believe that you can be living in a literal hell or a literal heaven in any moment, and a lot of that is based off of personal choice. A lot of it is based off of circumstance, but even people in the most desolate circumstances can still find happiness and still shift their perspective in a way that turns their existence into happiness, into a heaven. So I do believe that the mind has that power over our reality, that we can turn it into whatever we want it to be. And I do love, the mystery of death. That's
Yeah.
really cool. And I'm curious,
Absolutely.
you've worked for so long in end of life care with people, who have been near death. First of all, I'm wondering, have you ever been in a room with someone as they actually died? And then also, I'm wondering, how do you, as a social worker, as a counselor, how do you work with someone who knows that death is near, and how do you talk to them about death? Some people are afraid of it, some people are not afraid of it. Yeah, so have you seen someone actually pass in front of you, and how do you work with people who are in the—
Yes. Um, Yeah, so unfortunately, I've had experiences both professionally and personally where, yeah, I have seen somebody take their last breaths.
Mm,
It is again for someone like me the most rewarding experience, and I know that that's not necessarily for the average person, but you are allowing me into this last part of your life, or maybe I had known you a lot longer than that, but again, you're giving me a gift that is immeasurable, and certainly has no monetary value to that. It's priceless. So, but one thing that's really important to realize when you're doing end of life work is that it's not about you. It's
right.
about that person, again, that is at the end, taking their last breaths and ensuring that they're at the most comfort that you can provide, and of course, you're there for their loved ones as well. um, so the surprising thing about my work, yeah, and I would say that this was a great fear when I first started, was right. What happens if I go in there and they're in shambles and they're in tears and oh my gosh, I don't know the answer to their questions, or if I get emotional. But what has happened, I would say, a great majority of the time, is that people who are at the end of life have a great understanding as to why they're there. And more than often, they have fought a great battle, towards this illness. And they're in, hopefully this isn't a lack of a good word, but they're okay with it because they again, lived that life. And, for so long, they had a loss of autonomy, their health, a sense of self, how they even viewed themselves. They maybe even lost, friendships along the way. It's just like having that understanding, like I put in that good time. I did fight a battle, but at the same time, my body is worn out. My mind is, I'm not who I am. I don't see quality in my life. This is a relief.
Mm,
So the conversations I end up having with patients at the end of life are ones that they often cannot have, sadly, with loved ones, because they don't want to give the impression that they're giving up, which they're not, but they're just okay with it. That they reconcile this as the best as they can, and they're comfortable with what's about to happen. But right, it's the survivors, it's the loved ones that are struggling, that can't picture that life without them, that are still, even at the very end, are hoping for some sort of, quote unquote miracle to happen. But so that's where it's not scary. It's understanding my role. It's like I am uh the holder of that story. They want to share this narrative. They haven't had the opportunity. So it's my duty to give them permission to do so. So again, even at the end of life, you are operating in a way that makes sense to you and not other people. And, if you can even find happiness in sharing, what are your thoughts at the end of life? Absolutely. That is a wonderful avenue that I would like to provide to you. So it's, yeah, it's like the most open and honest conversations. They're very loving, they're insightful, whimsical. But I can't really say when I've encountered fear. For
mm,
the most part, people are okay with it, like I said, but they just worry about the ones that they're leaving behind. And a very interesting tidbit, which is kind of left field, is that I have also found that a lot of people at the end of life are living for their pets. The human beings, they can make some sense, like they're going to find a way, it's okay. But for animals, that human animal bond, like that is incredible. That unconditional love is, again, just resonating so highly with you that you just worry who is going to look after my dog, my cat. And so that's the other interesting part that I've learned about in conversations at the end of life, is how much animals mean to individuals.
wow. Well, that really flips the script on how I've understood people at the end of life. um, you know I guess, what I've always thought is, a lot of people at the end of life are, afraid to pass. But to hear you say that it's the family members, the people that surround them, that are the most afraid of what life is going to be like after them, that the people who are actually dying are okay with it. Like, wow, like that really resonates. And that feels really good to hear, because the person who's dying, they should be the one okay with it, right? They don't have much time to work on that issue if they were afraid of it. Whereas, the people they're leaving behind, like they still get to work on their grief. They still get to work on that because they're still here. And, that makes a lot of sense.
And again, I have an advantage in the sense that the majority of my end of life work has taken place in a hospice. So these are individuals that start to grieve themselves as soon as they get the diagnosis, right? Like it doesn't really actually come at the end. This is, been their journey for quite some time.
Wow.
It can be from mere weeks to years. But because again, they're living in this in the everyday, they're understanding the actual weight of this journey. Whereas again, those on the outside are being very hopeful, and we are also really good at seeing what we want to see, and the other times we might be burying our head in the sand. So that's why I really encourage family, when they can, just do, again, and we're taught this in social work, to really meet them where they're at. Like, don't force it, don't guide the conversation, even just let them be and share what they need to. Again, you're there as a support, as a loving person. It's not to negotiate at this time, what they're feeling. And even, their sort of what their goals of care might be. But yeah, it's again, people who are dying have had time to understand that this is a possible outcome. Whereas family members, yeah, I think will always be a different story. Because I think it's just mentality around it. I think if you let your mind go there, sometimes people feel like they're jinxing the situation. Like, oh no, I put too many ill thoughts or negative, feelings out there, and this is what caused it. And it's like, no, like you have every right to be practical and realistic about this, because it will sadly, age you when, gosh forbid, you do have to cross that bridge. Because if you were in denial that whole time, oh my goodness, your grieving process gets even more complicated. So, like you said, transparency goes such a long way. Yeah.
So before we launch into your research interests in this field, I sort of have a tangential question for you, because when you were just talking about the process that these folks go through, where they're given a diagnosis and then they start a journey where they begin their grieving process early, and then by the time they reach the end of life, like they've been in training for this moment and they're ready.
Yeah.
So my tangential sort of comment or question, and it's a little bit of an overlap between my research interest and your research interest, is that in the field of psychedelics and the research, there's a commonly held quote that meditation and psychedelics are training grounds for death. They're training tools to get closer to and understand and be comfortable with death. And that comes a lot from these experiences that people have both in meditation and through psychedelics, where you experience an ego death, where your identity completely dissolves, who you see yourself as, your literal sense of self dissolves away, and you become one with the universe for a little while. And people really feel like, when they're in the experience, they really feel like, oh my gosh, I'm literally dying right now, I'm not going to come back. And they have all those thoughts like, are my loved ones going to be okay? I've had these thoughts many times, reaching mystical states in meditation and psychedelics. And so when you hear that phrase, that meditation and psychedelics are a training ground for death, just what comes to mind for you?
I hope it provides a sense of gratitude.
Mm.
Like when you kind of, I don't know if this is the right phrase, but like kind of come back to real life, or your baseline, that you can reflect on that and be like, oh, okay, so that's a potential insight to what those final days might entail. Again, it might boost your spirit in a sense of like, I got to live every day, you know, for what it's worth, or again, define my own happiness and make sure those are the paths that I'm taking. Yeah, my mind just goes to like, oh, that's probably a very interesting educational opportunity about how to kind of go about life. Um, but yeah, I've always enjoyed how kind of our fields have sort of collided in that sense. Because I think, yeah, that there's a lot of interesting work being done around psychedelics and end of life care. Um, and we can go into that a bit later or whatnot. But yeah, no, that's interesting. This concept of ego death, because when you said that, like you know, your loss of sense of self, that's what people, again, who especially, you know, are living with, you know, long-term illnesses or life-threatening ones must experience, because all of a sudden you don't recognize yourself. It could be in a physical sense, but it's often, you know, quite emotional and psychological. If you were very astute and, you know, bright and on top of things, and all of a sudden you're forgetful, you know, that's something that you're grieving about yourself. Again, you know, physical things you could once do that you now have to let go of, that's another loss that you're grieving. It's a continuous cycle. So again, you know, just kind of going back, I think that's what is at the forefront of people who are at the end of life is a lot of the losses, and they can't recognize themselves anymore. So with that, again, I think comes your quality of to your life, and if it's null or not to what your standard should be, you have every right to again let go.
Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely think that, the way that you thought that it could be used, you come back with extreme gratitude for life. That's usually what gets reported, is that, people have this ego death experience and they come back and they're like, oh my gosh, like I really have to live my life to the fullest. And what an amazing revelation to have, right? And an amazing motivator to turn your life around if
Mhm.
you've been headed down a pathway that is not serving you. Um, it's interesting because, I said meditation and psychedelics are training for death. And in the way that we just described, they're also a training for life too. I have a really particular Buddhist meditation that I do. And I have these prayer beads from Nepal that are made out of yak bones. And in Buddhism,
Cool.
yeah, in Buddhism, the mala beads that are made out of bone are specifically and only to be used when meditating on the concept of death. And so I'll sit down with these beads and intentionally meditate, where my focus is entirely thinking about all topics related to death. And when I tell everyday Americans about this meditation, they're like, "Oh my gosh, how morbid can you get? You just sit down for hours and just think about death." And it's the exact opposite. And in this meditation, the more you think about death, the more you contemplate death, what happens is that you almost befriend it in a way. You become more familiar with death. You become familiar with some of the ideas of what's going to happen to you, what's going to happen to your loved ones, what's going to happen, you know, in the afterlife and things like that. And so you befriend death in a way, and the fear of death completely leaves. And then when you snap out of your meditation, almost always you have this brand new reinvigorated appreciation for life and for beauty and for the people and plants around you. And it's the exact opposite of a morbid meditation, to be able to do this. So I encourage the listeners to give it a try. Sit down for 5 or 10 minutes and close your eyes and think about nothing except for death related thoughts, and see what comes up for you. There might be some anxieties that come up around certain thoughts, but the more you sit with it, you're going to find that there's nothing really to be afraid of. That death is the most natural thing that you could ever do in your life. It's the one thing in your life that you cannot fail at, right? No one's going to fail at dying. It's going to happen to us all. But I want to dig now into your research. So you've been in the end of life field for 10 plus years, and now you're digging into end of life issues for people who are often very overlooked, especially in our culture, which are those inmate populations. So folks who are incarcerated in a number of different types of jails and prisons across the country. You know, the United States is the number one jail and prison population as far as numbers in the whole country or in the whole world per capita. We have a huge private prison industrial complex here in the United States, where we're basically locking away marginalized populations and using them for slave labor to, you know, manufacture all sorts of goods for cheap. You know, I could go off for on a tangent forever about how bad our country is at that. But you really have impressed upon me the importance of not overlooking these people, that these people, even though they may have made mistakes and they are in these lockdown facilities, that they still have a right to a peaceful death, that we all do, that we all have certain, you know, human rights around that. And so I'm wondering if you,
Absolutely.
yeah, if you could just share with the audience real quick. Like I spent the last 2 years hearing about your project and I love it. If you could just spend a little bit of time telling the audience what you're looking into as far as, you know, inmates and end of life.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, in a way, I kind of came into this program and this country with a bit of a blank slate. Of course, yeah, sadly, I do know that the US has the highest incarceration rate in the world. But an also interesting trend is that globally, though, incarceration rates have decreased, while this country alone, that has, you know, escalated to an incredibly harmful degree. So, you know, it just kind of started off first with a basic literature review of what is available, you know, in terms of what are the end of life interventions that currently exist in correctional facilities. So sadly, kind of off the bat, there isn't a whole lot of literature, at least I think, you know, that deserves to be dedicated to this realm. So already it's a bit of an under-researched area. But I found that, right, you know, there are a lot of systematic barriers, a lot of politics involved, you know, and so, you know, every state is kind of doing their own thing, has different varying types of care mandates. And so with that kind of comes, you know, different sort of expectations, and everybody in the end, I think, you know, fingers crossed, are kind of doing the best with the resources that they have. So again, lots of, you know, inhumane treatment, you know, pain management continues to be an obstacle, because how do you provide, you know, narcotics to the, you know, this population? But one wonderful part that I have found through my research, which is what I'll be dedicating my dissertation to, is the prevalence of peer inmate end of life caregiving programs. So this is where a healthy inmate is trained to volunteer to support a dying inmate, or individuals at the end of life. So this is providing everything from practical care to emotional care, maybe even spiritual. But it's just, you know, a wonderful sense of camaraderie. And, you know, there's almost like this substitute family, because, you know, again, differing correctional facilities have kind of different visitation rights when it comes to when an inmate's at the end of life. So should a family not be there? So going back to your beautiful introduction to this, is right, these are still people who are members of society and are providing such an integral service. Like, I can do this because I got the education to do this, right? And, you know, I got these opportunities for this experience, but I even have friends in social work that are like, oh my gosh, Shivani, I could never do this type of work. So then we look at like this incredibly vulnerable population where they are able to do this work. And so what I'm hoping to do is shed light like on this extraordinary service, because again, I don't know for sure what sort of vocational opportunities are available. Again, I think they're different in every prison. I don't know what sort of incentives are involved. These are sort of the things that I hope to examine. But, you know, in a sense, you don't have to do this at all. But some reason, as a volunteer, you are providing this type of care for your friend or a peer at the end of life. So my dissertation is looking into what are the motivators, right? Like, A, like what makes you do this? And B, what do you get out of it? what is your meaning making experience from this? So I hope to capture, these wonderful narratives of these volunteers who provide this service. Um, and right, especially knowing, yeah, so I'm very curious to kind of especially know what their training is, because again, I'm well aware of what a community hospice volunteer would get, but is it this sort of the same sort of information being delivered to inmate populations? So I want to know again, like, without a doubt, I believe this is definitely contributing to, I'm very interested again, like how are they provided with education? How is it being delivered? What are those sort of outcomes? And also, what are the gaps in care? What are some of the areas, as I'm sure there are a lot of places for improvement. But I've had the opportunity to kind of present this work, over almost 20 conferences in the past 2 years. And the number one feedback I get is, I didn't even think of that. And, in my mind, I'm thinking, right, why would you, unless you know a person that's incarcerated, your mind's not going to go necessarily A, to incarcerated populations, and B, like worrying about how they're passing away. But this is a very big problem, whether you know somebody who is in prison or not, because this affects taxpayers as well. As U.S. citizens know, overcrowding is a huge problem in U.S. prisons. A lot, or 9 out of 10 I've read of inmates, they pass away from older age or a life-threatening illness. It's not due to homicide or suicide. So it's just people, again, aging in place. And what are correctional facilities doing to make sure that they're getting, the best of care? Because I come from a place, as do hopefully most people that work in medicine, that look at healthcare as a right and not a privilege. And it shouldn't be, ripped with all the other civil liberties that these individuals have taken away from them. Like, they are still living, and breathing, if they can especially still, verbalize what kind of care they would like at the end of life. I believe that should be acknowledged. But otherwise, I think they should have all of the resources that they need to make sure that they get proper end of life care. Because the other part of this is that there's such a thing called compassionate release policies. So these laws, at least on paper, say that, hey, if you're an inmate, you're at the end of life, and if you meet all of these sort of prerequisites, there's an opportunity for you to die in the community. Well, even though some form of this exists in every US state, they are very complicated. Some are incredibly difficult to even fill out the application. Even lawyers are like completely get confused at the language that are being used within these applications. So they end up being incredibly underutilized. So, okay, fine, if you're going to create a barrier for inmates to access this, then again, that's why it has to be much more of a significant issue to make sure that you're providing quality end of life care within, correctional facilities. So, I've had the opportunity to attend a lot of conferences around healthcare in corrections. And so, there's a wonderful noise, I think, that's being made, but not to, I think, the degree that I think it certainly deserves. So I'm very excited to, again, network more and make connections and further on with this type of research, because at the end of the day, poor choices don't make for poor people, and everybody gets to die with dignity, at least where I come from. And if they want somebody there to hold their hand, they should be allotted that. And I don't think it's asking for too much. Compassion, I think, should be for free.
Yeah. And I think we'll get into this a little bit later. This piece about healthcare being a human right. It's almost like here in the United States, we don't view healthcare that way. We view it as if you can afford it, then you can get the help. If you can't afford it, well, sorry, you need to make some better choices, which is really unfortunate. I don't see that in any other country that I've visited in my life. We we have this tendency to just turn our backs a lot more on people in need. So you're talking about inmates at end of life, and I'm wondering, because I don't know if I've sussed this out yet. in the last couple of years that I've known you and talked with you about your project, but are these inmates who are, you said 9 out of 10 of them age out, are they primarily inmates who are in like a hospice situation where they've gotten a diagnosis of being terminal, or they know that their death is coming, and so they need this peer support? Or are these peer support programs also in place for like people on death row who also have like an actual date that they're going to die, and they may want some support around the process leading up to their death date?
That is a great question. I honestly don't know for sure. I do know that they are becoming more prevalent. At least 80, of these programs exist. It could even be, close to 100 across the US, which does sound like a large number, but again, I think there are quite a few prisons that also exist across the
Mhm.
US. So I think this comes down to as most things, like money. It takes resources, it takes people to train, extra staffing, correctional officers to provide security. So it's not necessarily something, that can kind of, I think, be created overnight. It does take, a lot of advocacy. But yeah, I'm especially, around death row. That's really interesting because that's also, an anticipation of sort of end of life. I but ooh, the stigma sort of attached to that. Are they, would they? That's a good question. Are they allotted the same type of social or spiritual or emotional support as somebody, that's right, dying in a hospice.
Mhm.
But again, I don't even know how many hospices actually exist across US prisons, or if, inmates are dying in an infirmary, or even, gosh forbid, within their own cell. Um, it's because, again, there is to kind of see um, who is doing what and what has been most effective, especially.
Mhm. I was just on my other Google screen here. I was looking up how many prisons there are in the U.S. It says the American criminal justice system holds almost 2.3 million people in
Yeah.
1,833 state prisons, 110 federal prisons, 1,772 juvenile facilities, over 3,000 local jails, 218 immigration detention facilities, 80 Indian country jails, as well as military prisons, civil commitment centers, and state psychiatric institutes. So, yeah, we're not just talking about prisons here. We're talking about people dying in any and all of these types of facilities who might be
Mhm.
needing this sort of care and who could benefit from your research. That's a lot of people.
Oh yeah, yeah. And how do we find them all? And certainly, yeah, assess what their needs are, and especially, are they being, delivered?
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and another gosh, alarming figure is taxpayers. Yeah, and state and federal governments are paying over $2 billion annually, for healthcare. And who knows if potentially, those costs can be cut if there are more opportunities, either A, to enhance care within facilities, or B, provide more opportunities, right, to die or age out in the community. But that is a big number. So that's, a whole other reason why I hope people don't view this imperative issue as, somebody else's problem. Like, no, this is, believe me, definitely one that you should consider to be in your own backyard.
And that's $2+ billion just for the healthcare of these individuals. I think, and I don't know
Yeah, just
where
on
the
healthcare.
yeah, I don't know where this statistic came from or when I last saw it, but I was amazed when I saw it. It was something like each year it costs an average of around $60,000+ to house and feed and provide health care to each inmate in our system. $60,000, that's a lot more money than a lot of people with college degrees make every year. I used to work with
Mhm.
homeless individuals here in Fort Collins, as well as, I was a counselor in the local jail. And I would commonly hear from people who were living on the street that they would prefer to get arrested so that they have a warm meal and a warm bed and a roof over their head, because the taxpayer will pay for it. When why can't we spend as taxpayers less money? Probably we could probably spend 40,000 per individual and provide a slew of services to help them get jobs and help them get shelter and help them get back on their feet, as opposed to just locking them up and putting them in cages.
Oh,
It amazes
absolutely. Yeah. Oh gosh, it gets to be infuriating, as you go through, each statistic, and when you think, right, what that money could have gone to instead. Um, I wish I was more hopeful, that things were getting better. Unfortunately, I think it might be going the opposite way. But I mean, it invigorates me even more to pursue this type of advocacy, and give voice to those that have a voice but aren't being heard.
me. Mhm.
So it takes, I think, I'm hoping that a lot more individuals that work in corrections, in particularly within healthcare, share their experiences and their, their observations and their own narratives, because they see it, in their everyday. Sadly, people are not, or aren't in a position where they can, ask inmates, how are things going. So we have to rely on these professionals. But you've seen on the news and online, like, inmates that they capture their own sort of cell phone footage. I saw a few, especially during COVID, and showing, what terrible type of environments that they're in, and they're really, literally left to die. No masks, no sort of safety precautions, certainly no 6 feet
Mhm.
social distancing. And an uproar of how, this footage got released, and it's just like, how could you fault them? They're in such a vulnerable position. Nobody's advocating for them, so they have to do it themselves. And while, yes, through illegal means, how else were we supposed to understand what this actually looked like? So yeah, again, all I can do is my best, and that will always be rooting for an underdog. But they shouldn't be underdogs. They're still human beings.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right that there is a social stigma attached to anybody who is incarcerated for any reason. And that still exists. And, I know that there's probably people out there even listening to this episode who are thinking in the back of their head, they just want to tell you, like, these people don't deserve anything. Like, they made their choices. They should be punished,
Mhm.
and it's almost like that
Yeah.
punishment stigma, that punishment mentality, that you did the crime, you need to do the time, and you need to be punished and have your rights stripped away from you, because that's what happens in jail. Is here, if you live in this country, you have a ton of different rights, right to free speech, right to own a weapon, all these rights. But when you go to jail, you lose a lot of those rights.
Yeah.
In some cases, you even lose rights to your own consciousness, to your own sovereignty over your own
Your
body.
own health, your
Yeah,
body, your
exactly.
mind.
But this stigma, this sort of mindset of punishment, is still very pervasive in the United States culture
Mhm.
anyway. And I think we could learn a lot from different countries who take more of a rehabilitative mindset towards individuals who are struggling like this,
Exactly.
right? Like rehabilitative models that are focused more on community and focused more on, like, how do we get these people back reintegrated into communities, so that they can be of service, so they have meaning and purpose, and so that they're valued by others. And that versus the punishment model, which is all about, let's lock them away, let's put them in solitary confinement. And you see the statistics between those two models, right? Rehabilitative programs oftentimes cost less than punitive models.
Mhm.
The effects on long-term mental health care and physical health of individuals who are in the punitive systems versus the rehabilitative systems, There's a stark difference between those two. The rehabilitative systems promote, better long-term mental health and physical health versus the punitive ones. It's just amazing to me to think that, we as a culture in the United States, and you're from Canada, so I'm speaking as a United States citizen, that I'm almost ashamed. I'm ashamed to be a United States citizen. Sometimes I'm ashamed to be even associated with probably the majority of people who think that these people are no longer people, that these people need to be punished, and I don't know, maybe it's because I'm, again, have a Buddhist background, and I believe in compassion and love for everyone. Doesn't matter who you are or what you've done. But yeah, it's just so disheartening.
It is amazing how we will condone and confine somebody for the worst decision of their life, right? If they commit a crime, that's it. No room for forgiveness, for rehabilitation, an opportunity for atonement. Everything is just said and done from that moment. It's, yeah, like you said, it's just absolutely devastating. We have just, in that exact moment, you've already, sentenced somebody to life. Yeah, I don't get any sort of it doesn't make me feel good to know that, you feel ashamed or anything like that. But, it's maybe taking those feelings and, again, spinning it into some sort of gold and using that to continue to advocate, and at least just educate, people that might have, sort of those ill judgments of, right, you don't deserve healthcare, you don't deserve, dignity at the end of life. This is all a part of your punishment and in your sentence. And no, it's not. It's you are still entitled to compassion that should be allotted to you, especially at the end of life. Like, again, should you be interested? I don't think that's for anybody else to define. But again, right, this is the U.S. is very interesting when it comes to their laws, and you know you still have the death penalty and things that don't exist in Canada. So it's a different type of perspective for sure. But yeah, I really hope, public apathy changes, and certainly social stigma, that don't think further than this is a human being, don't define them for what they did or didn't do. Just have some empathy. If you were in those shoes, what would you need, and it's just a little that goes a long way. And they're at the end of life. What harm could this really do if you just held somebody's hand, who had a criminal record or not, and gave them some comfort of where they were going next? I don't really know why that would impact somebody that lived on the outside, that wasn't incarcerated. It's give that to them. But again, if you don't understand, or if you're not educated, it's going to be, yeah, a pretty rocky road to get them to understand.
Yeah, it is tough, and I'm going to get a little vulnerable myself here, and go out on a limb, and let you and the listeners who don't know this about me. There was a time in my life too where I was incarcerated. I was, in my late teens, early 20s, and was getting in a lot of legal trouble with alcohol and underage drinking and driving, and things like that. And I never went to prison, but I was in a county jail for weeks, a number of weeks, and I know that that's small amount of time compared to a lot of other people. But I'm just saying, like, a lot of people when I went through that, a lot of people in my life wrote me off as, he's a lost cause. He'll never get it.
Yeah.
Just leave him in there, And then, I got out, and look at me, like, 10, 20 years later, I'm, in a PhD program. I'm fulfilling my dreams. the happiest I've ever been. You know, I've helped hundreds of people, you know, learn how to heal themselves, you know, and it just goes to show that even people who make bad decisions are not bad people, you know.
Exactly.
People are not defined by one or two or 10 decisions that they make, you know. They can still have the potential to change worlds, you know. So I'm living proof of that,
Absolutely.
and I hope people don't hold that against me still. I see it today as a strength. It certainly allowed me to be a much better counselor inside the jail system, because I had inmates talking to me, and they knew that I had been in their seat before, literally in the same exact jail that they were in. And they're like, "Oh my gosh, you really know what I'm going through." I'm like, "Yeah, I do. And it sucks. And here, let me help you,"
Absolutely.
you know?
Oh gosh, I recently attended this really fantastic conference around healthcare in corrections, and one of the reasons I absolutely loved it was about 80% of the speakers they had were formerly incarcerated individuals who now held like really highly regarded positions in
Awesome.
academia. Like they are researchers, they're professors, and like what you just spoke to and what you certainly represent today is right. You know, that resiliency, you end up becoming the best people to educate around, around issues that imprisoned populations face, or sorry, incarcerated populations face. Like, who best can put a name and face to that than people who lived it and did fantastic things, on the other, once they were able to be civilians again. These are really integral stories that need to be told and need to be shared, so we don't have this horrible perspective that, right, these are not members of society, and be written off and let them just wither away. uh, Again, some of the most fantastic people in life, I think, right, have maybe, whether you spent time in prison or not is not it. It's like, have you ever made a mistake, right? If you're a living, breathing person, you 100% did that. But these experiences, they can either, right, eat away at you, or you can learn from them and do really, really marvelous things with that, with those sort of opportunities. So I, again, think that people that have spent time or spending time in, in prison or in jail have a lot to offer, but they needed to be provided with that opportunity, which sadly they're not allotted. Or even, given permission to, or they start to self-define themselves as how the people around them are defining them as, lost cause, or other harmful descriptors like that. So, wonderful to you and all of those individuals that are heard as well, that where you didn't believe what other people were saying, right? You found that confidence within yourself, especially, again, that resiliency, and you proved them wrong. But at the end of the day, you did what made you happy. And that is just like the best life living, right? It's just, I was able to find my way, whether you believed in me or not.
Yeah. Well, even, you know, it is resiliency, and I'm pretty damn resilient, but I think a lot of it was, you know, I used those words. So I'm so grateful and thankful, and that I had those people in my life doubting me and telling me I was going to be worthless and telling me I was going to be nothing, because it's their words that motivated me and still motivate me to this day to achieve the things that I achieve. Like I you know, going back to the very first thing we were talking about, like not living up to other people's expectations. Other people expected me to fail, and I used that as motivation to, you know, in my mind, like turn around and give them the middle finger and say, "No, look, you believe I'm gonna be a quitter, you believe I'm gonna fail at this, watch me, I'm gonna prove all of you people wrong," you know, and not live by your expectation, because I see my own value, you know, I know what I'm worth. And even if you don't see it, like that's your loss, you know, because I have great things to do here on this planet. um you know, we were talking about you know, the jail system and end of life and things like that, and especially talking about rights within those systems and also rights within the United States. And I think that's a perfect segue for us to transition to a little more of a lighthearted topic, but it's still something I'm extremely interested in. So you're an international student. You were, you joined our program from Canada, and I'd love to talk to you about the differences between our two countries, because that always fascinates me. Like whenever I travel to other countries, I always spend some time looking up their laws. I mean, you should anyway, because a lot of travelers get in a lot of trouble by traveling to other countries and assuming that their laws are the same. They can get in a lot of trouble. So yeah, I'd love to talk to you about Canada versus the US as far as, rights, gun rights, drug rights, rights to freedom of speech, things like that, as well as talk about rights around healthcare, right? You guys have more of a universal healthcare system where everyone's guaranteed healthcare.
Yeah.
Over here, we definitely do not have that. We are a for-profit healthcare system to the max. So I'd love to talk to you, and especially because I've never been to Canada. Actually, I don't even know if Canada would let me in because of my DUI history when I was 18 or 19. I should try to get over there. But you coming over here, I would love to hear what you have to think about the United States and the way we do our rights here.
I had a bit of an insight, before, because like over 10 years ago, I got my master's degree and I did that in New York. So this is my second opportunity now that I have living in the US. And yeah, it is, we here as Canadians, of course, and even traumatizing, sadly, US healthcare systems can be. That's not to say that the Canadian healthcare system isn't reflective of that too. Like we can absolutely be not up to snuff as well. And it can absolutely also get very expensive to achieve, certain kind of healthcare, or, if you have specific healthcare needs, things can still come out of pocket and certainly at a cost. But yeah, comparatively, I think it's, oh gosh, even today, even with all my education, I still can't for sure tell you, the difference between Medicaid and Medicare. You have so many, like HMOs,
Mm-hmm.
is that what it's called? Yeah. I'm still, again, really, really fuzzy. I really need to fine tune that. Whereas here it's like, oh, okay, let's just get you there. Even coming home, I'm not, even though right now I'm paying health insurance through the school, I'm still comforted knowing that, gosh forbid something happened here, I don't think like it would be as, I know for sure it wouldn't be as destructive, gosh forbid, if I had gone to the US, and gotten injured there. This is why I tell all of my Canadian friends, even if you're going down to the border, just even for a day, doing a day shopping, get health insurance. You can get it through your bank or like through other sort of private agencies. Cover yourself for that day. We hear horror stories all the time in Canada. Somebody went, just down to Spokane or Seattle and just went shopping. They got terribly sick. And this is hundreds and thousands of dollars for medical care. And, insurance is no longer going to cover this. And you're just left to foot this bill. Like it's always been a be safe than sorry type of situation. But I don't, because I'm not terribly educated around, especially around costs. I can't speak to it too much, but like it just, I guess the most alarming thing is, sadly, yeah, it is a sense that healthcare again is very, very much a privilege in this country, as opposed to a right. Because so many times in my mind, I just default, well, why don't they, do X, Y, and Z? And it's like, no, that sort of access doesn't exist here. It's a lot of hoops, expensive hoops to kind of jump through. And gosh forbid, if you live with a chronic illness, you know, they're expensive already to get proper care for that.
In
And in
Canada?
time, yeah, in Canada and in the US as well, because a lot of people kind of look to sort of like non-traditional modalities, like things like acupuncture,
Mm.
massage, but these aren't necessarily covered by insurance. So you are, again, kind of paying out of pocket. And, again, when you're living with chronic or a life-threatening illness, like it can become like a second job just to take good care of yourself with it. So yeah, you're dealing with a lot. All of a sudden your income is going down, but now costs have now increased. But in Canada, we have opportunities where you can apply early for your pension. Can kind of get money through there. Again, I'm not quite sure how it really works in the US, but I just know when I sort of, educate my American friends, like, oh, well, in Canada, you can kind of do this. The look on their face is like, oh my gosh, no, like you can't all of a sudden have some comfort knowing that you're going to get some financial assistance for your health care. I don't want to sound, again, very judgmental, because I know this is always a thing between our countries here. But yeah, again, my takeaway is just, again, if you are traveling to the US, make sure you get travel or healthcare insurance, because, again, life is too unpredictable. And the last thing you need is an obnoxious hospital bill.
Yeah. I hear a lot on both sides of the argument as far as universal healthcare versus a privatized healthcare system like we have here versus, Medicaid and Medicare for everyone. And I struggle with it. There's goods and bads with all the systems. You hear with socialized, universal healthcare that great, everybody gets healthcare, but maybe the quality goes down, or maybe there's a much longer line, waiting period in order to get the assistance. Lower quality, you don't get, or maybe you don't get a choice in doctor. With privatized healthcare, like,
Mhm.
yeah, maybe you get the best doctors, maybe the service, maybe you don't have to wait in line, you can get your surgery like the very next week, but it's extremely expensive, and it's out of certain people's price ranges. um, you know i I can remember a time in my life when I was out of school, right? So when we're in school, we are forced to pay for insurance through the school, which I also don't like that either. But there was a time when I was not in school, and I didn't have any health insurance. And here I am, competing and training in my martial arts and my athletics. And I remember my mindset being completely different than what it is when I do have insurance. Like right now, I have insurance, and I'm not super worried about injuries. I know that injuries happen, but I also know that I'm covered when it does happen. When I was training and competing and I did not have insurance because I couldn't afford it, my attitude and my mentality in training was totally different. I would not take the kind of risks that I needed to. I would not. I would not even be able to pursue my own happiness to the fullest extent, because I had to worry, like, am I going to get hurt today? I cannot afford another surgery. Like, oh wait, my friend wants me to go rock climbing or on a big hike. Oh, I can't do that because what if I slip and fall and I hurt myself? Like, it was such a barrier to personal happiness, because I did not have I didn't have an assurance that I was going to be taken care of. And that's terrible. That's why I would love some sort of universal health care, if it could be done, well, and it could be done right. And I think we have a lot to learn from countries like yours in regards to that. What do you think about other rights issues between our countries? So for instance, congratulations, I think Canada decriminalized all drugs, or legalized cannabis, or countrywide. I think that's awesome. Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that's something that we're still fighting, a huge drug war here in the United States, and hopefully in my lifetime, and hopefully I can contribute to the ending of that war that has caused so many deaths and incarcerations. Now that I think about it, out of all the wars that the United States has ever been involved in, World War II, World War I, Vietnam. I'm thinking maybe the drug war has had it's certainly been the most expensive war we've ever fought, but it might be the war that has affected the most people negatively. That's interesting to even think about. But yeah, talk to me about
Yeah, no, I can definitely. Oh no, sorry. No, I was just agreeing with you that right, so much money has gone into that drug war, but it would be very interesting to see what exactly how the outcomes be how what have been the outcomes of that. And the irony is right now I'm taking this exceptional social work course on working with service members
mm,
and military families, and the devastating statistics of how many service members are struggling with addiction due to trauma, experienced in combat, or even not in combat, but at least just from separation from family, and having to endure like such a quick adjustment in such a short time. So it's interesting how these courageous individuals fight for their country. They come back with these terrible addictions, need for support, and are they really getting what should be allotted to them 100% in terms of healthcare? So yeah, sorry, just kind of going a little full circle there with all of these wars, and who exactly is winning.
yeah. No, but between our two countries, right? And this, I bring this up mostly. I'm just super curious, but I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the host brought up something that I hadn't even thought about, which I looked into and was true. So here in the United States, we have our Bill of Rights, we have our Declaration of Independence, we have all these things that tell us like these are rights that you as a citizen have that the government or nobody can take away from you, right? And our First Amendment right is freedom of speech, right? We have the freedom to speak and talk in any manner we want and say anything we want and rebel against our government if we want to. Like we can do all that stuff in our country, but Canada does not have a freedom of speech, right? Like you guys don't have that up there.
Yeah, and if we do, yeah, and if we by chance do it, it's not as explicit or sort of reminded amongst the population as it is often kind of, of course, is here in the U.S., where right, you have that right. I don't know whether it's culture or upbringing, but we also have a great understanding that there's consequences to what we say.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to how hateful speech is not tolerated at all. One thing, sadly, that the US is devoid of is that we have a multicultural act that was implemented by Prime Minister Trudeau, basically saying you're going to be in this country and you're going to see people from different walks of life, completely look different from you, and 100% you are to respect them. And we are taught this at a very, very young age. Like, it's in our elementary school curriculum. Not to mention, we are amongst such a diverse group of students. It's almost like silly if you try to kind of be a racist. Not to say it doesn't exist in Canada, 100% it does, as the world is definitely seeing right now, due to our terrible mistreatment of Indigenous communities. As sadly more and more unmarked graves are being discovered on old residential schools. We can certainly get to that, back to that as well. But again, I just want to say that Canada isn't as whimsical and perfect as, of course, we hope it is, and kind of how it is spun in other countries. We definitely have our problems, but yeah, it's just almost like, again, we're really taught that we have a responsibility to our peers and to our neighbors, and And again, it shouldn't matter what culture you come from. This is Canada. We are a melting pot. This is the norm, and this is how it's always going to be.
Mm-hmm.
When I take the time to explain to individuals, we don't have states, we have provinces and territories, and our territories are highly populated with Indigenous communities. How we created a new territory, I think in the 90s, Nunavut, and and it's just like, it's such an interesting concept to people who weren't born and raised in Canada, when it's so ingrained in our upbringing. Like, it was such an interesting experience to see this new territory that was emerged in our country, and what types of communities and people resided there. So yeah, to this day, my friends, especially in Canada, are just a beautiful rainbow of people. It's a lot of diversity, and I think when we talk in class and things like that, that's one thing that I do bring up, was just sort of that culture shock of not seeing people that look like me. I'm Indian. Yeah, and not having that a part of your everyday.
Mm-hmm.
That was quite interesting. But yeah, again, this is also what makes our countries quite unique. But hopefully, we'll continue to have wonderful cultures that are in both of our countries, because they have, these are wonderful opportunities to learn about different people, and values and ethics and rituals. It's so interesting when we have a good understanding that it's not just us walking this earth. It's a bunch of different types of people. So I think that's also quite celebrated and encouraged. I can think of a lot of multicultural types of events in everything from like elementary to high school, getting an opportunity to visit, different places of worship. Yeah, it's very ingrained in us that, that there's diversity, and it's something to be, celebrated, as opposed to be scared of.
Yeah, I think at least what I'd like to see here in the United States is almost like a mixing of the two of what's going on currently. Like, so I love in the United States, how hardcore we are about our freedoms, our rights, right? Like that's what makes America America. And I'm very proud of that, right? So I do believe, like, you should be able to say whatever you want, whenever you want, and especially if you are resisting power structures that are oppressive, right? You should be able to speak up and not have to worry about someone locking you up or killing you because of it.
Mhm.
But also, we need a heavy dose of what you guys are doing up in Canada. But, we should be able to say whatever we want. And we're definitely taught that. But we're not so much taught, like, but you need to be respectful with your speech. We leave that part out of it. And I think the most that I got growing up was, someone telling me, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And
Right. Yeah.
that's our version of be respectful with your speech. But I think both systems are great, and they both need a little bit more overlap when it comes to that. And here in the US, we certainly need to open our eyes a lot more to diversity of, not just ethnicity and race and gender and identity and all these things, but open up our ideas to, we have a diversity of ideas, we have a diversity of opinions, we have a diversity of perspectives, and all need to be respected. You don't have to adopt or believe or agree with somebody else and how they label themselves, but you certainly need to respect them in their own sovereignty, and
Yeah.
trust that they're going to respect you in that too. So I love that in Canada, you guys, like, you make that a part of your culture. I love that you guys have written that into some of your laws, that if you come here, you are going to respect other people with your speech. I love that.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's on paper. What
Sure.
if people actually practice is certainly down to them. But I think one thing that both of our countries can certainly work on is giving respect to those that built our countries, right?
Mm.
So for us, it's Indigenous communities for the US. I mean, it's completely different walks of life, from Italians to Jewish communities. Like everybody played a significant part in the growth of the US. And so, again, where's the harm in just giving credit where credit is due?
Right.
But everybody, wants sort of that piece of the pie and wants their own recognition. But, you've also come a long way again, from the removal of certain, statues that, that were kind of celebrating maybe individuals that perhaps, cause more harm than good. There's great social change, certainly going on in the US, certainly a lot more that needs to happen. But this is what happens when, again, individuals are finding their voice. And again, they're recognizing that, no, this is not making for a happy life. And there are certain things, and especially speaking up, that that they need to engage in, and more power to them.
So let's talk a little bit.
Yeah, slowly.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said. Let's talk a little bit about gun rights across borders, right? So here in the U.S., it's literally written into our Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment. You're allowed to keep and bear arms, and people will debate what that means. Is it for hunting? Is it for oppressive government? Is it for whatever reason? Is it just for recreation and fun? Whatever. What are the laws regarding firearms in Canada? I have no idea. I'm a huge gun advocate too.
Oh gosh, again,
yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I can speak for myself and a lot of people I know. None of us are interested, sadly, or maybe fortunately, in guns. So it's not something I've ever sought out. I know like of a few people that maybe know somebody else that has gone like hunting in British Columbia. I'm quite sure it goes on in the Yukon and where and whatnot. But that's sort of more the context that we hear about guns is like right for hunting. That's certainly not to say that we don't have gun violence ourselves, but to attain a gun, I wouldn't know the first thing of what to do. I'm quite sure a criminal record check is required. I don't know if an emotional health one is, or if a medical background check. It's not a part of, I think, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think majority, it's really not in our, sort of everyday.
So there's no like gun
or
stores
necessarily one that we were.
Yeah, there's no gun stores on every
Oh
corner
gosh.
here in the US.
No, I remember, I'm originally from Calgary, Alberta, and they opened up this, is it Billy Bass store? Something like that. And I think it caused like a bit of a commotion because they were selling rifles. And I certainly don't even know to this day if they still do, but that's sort of like the knee-jerk reaction of like, oh my gosh, how are you making these so readily available? Whereas, at a certain time, I think in the West, you could walk into a Walmart, and get a gun and ammunition. Like I hear you have to go to a specific gun store, I'm assuming. I'm hoping there's some sort of rigorous, application process to make sure that this is going in the hands of somebody, that requires it, hopefully mostly for like recreational purposes. But, I again, growing up, my household, a lot of my friends, we didn't have guns in our house, to protect us. It wasn't, I don't even think, a thought, for most families. Yeah, so that was a bit of a culture shock. I remember being in class with you one day and you were telling me, I think a university maybe in Wyoming, where they provide lockers for students specifically for, their rifles and whatnot, so that they, it was more conducive to go hunting after class. And I'm sitting there like, I go home and watch Netflix after school. But yeah, okay, I guess there are certain individuals that need to go hunting right after school. Again, not even a thought in my mind. It took me quite a few months to learn that in Colorado, or I guess on our campus, that's open carry, right? You can carry a gun if you
I'm not exactly sure. It's flip-flopped a couple times. Yeah. But regardless,
Okay.
yeah,
But
regardless.
again, so I,
Mhm.
but I went home, that winter break and I was like, oh, hey, dad and other family members, like, guess what I learned about my school? And everybody's just horrified because, again, this isn't a part of our norm, but it's not even something that, you think about. You take, you let your kids go to school and they go to learn and then they come back and you don't think that this is, any part of their culture, where, right, it can be quite prevalent in the US. So, I can just only do what I do, which is like I don't own a gun. I'm not interested in acquiring one. But I have to respect the fact that I'm in a country where you have the right to attain one and to carry one. And if I'm uncomfortable with it, well, I do have the option. I can come back to Canada, right? But that's certainly not what's allotted to all U.S. citizens. So I certainly can't speak for somebody that lives there, full times. But yeah, that was just a learning curve, we'll say. But I know it now, and whether I certainly I don't let it try to affect me. But yeah, it's a pretty alarming difference. We'll say that for sure.
Yeah, and I think, there's plenty of United States citizens who are in a, not the same position as you, because we all grew up around this culture, but in a similar situation in that, I have so many friends who have never fired a gun, never had a gun in their house, never, that they have a distaste for firearms. It's interesting though, most people that I know and who speak of having a distaste for firearms, as soon as they go and they try shooting in a controlled setting, they come out of that experience just loving it, for some reason, like the feeling that it gives them. But yeah, I grew up around firearms. My mom taught me how to shoot when I was 4 years old. Um, I shot my entire youth. I was the varsity captain of my high school shooting team. I went to a military high school, and so we went and we did competitive shooting against like the Naval Academy and stuff like that. Um and now it's a big part of my life. I still am a gun advocate. I carry one with me. I have a concealed carry permit, and I carry one in my vehicle. I carry one on me when I go into sketchy places. Like right after that grocery store shooting in Boulder over the
Yeah.
summer, right? The King Soopers shooting. Every time I would go to King Soopers, I would carry my gun with me because I'm not gonna allow myself to become a victim in a situation like that. Like if I have the power to stop someone who's gonna do harm to other people, like I want to be able to step up and do that. And so that's kind of the culture that I grew up in. Now, so two totally different cultures, but I think it's interesting. And still, like I can still have respect for people who don't want anything to do with guns. It's not like I feel like you're less of a person, or like you're sometimes I might feel like you're missing out on some things, but I still respect your opinion, and that's the thing, is like all I want is other people to respect the rights and the opinions of gun owners too, as long as we're responsible with them and we're not hurting anyone else. And 99% of gun owners in this country are responsible gun owners. Most of the shootings that happen are not people who acquired them legally, and they're not people who should be fit to have a firearm. But I'm glad that so many people have them here, because all sorts of these crimes, these gun crimes, get stopped by responsible gun owners who take action in the moment, and those people don't
And
get enough
we're
credit or
just saturated with it. It's gun violence after gun violence. So right. So, so those that right are responsible with their firearm, unfortunately have to carry the burden of those that are kind of ruining it for the rest of you. So and I respect the fact that you're trying to advocate that no, not all of us are being harmful to others with this. um so right, we're sort of agreeing, but we don't necessarily have to necessarily do what the other person is doing. I don't think I will ever own a gun, never say never, but that's certainly not something that I've ever thought of, again, because I can't even speak to even how to get one or even what the laws are. But yeah, it's they just, yeah, I say it just takes like a few bad apples, right? Just to kind of put a sour taste in everybody's mouth. So yeah, unfortunately, it's not the good gun owners that make the news. It's the ones that sadly made a terrible decision.
Well, if you ever want to just give it a try, let me know, and I will be more than happy to take you to a legal gun range, and you can shoot a target in a totally safe environment, and I would be happy to do that. But no
I
pressure.
was the kid who played duck hunt and took the gun right to the television.
Oh,
Like, I would just be awful at that. But I do appreciate the invitation. Again, never say never. It would definitely be again another culture shock for me. But yeah, it's both our countries, have lots of wonderful things about them, and then also things, yeah, that I'm sure we both wish we could change. But thank goodness for social workers like us, who again can recognize that good change can happen, but it does take advocacy and education, and really just resilience. Just keep fighting that good fight. That's one of the reasons, I was drawn to working with incarcerated individuals, because my mind always goes to the underdog, and again, who kind of needs most of that support. So yeah, again, I think we're both well prepared to do well with our education, and with the connections that we have, in hoping that both of our countries prosper and do well and be good.
yeah, be good. And the only reason why I brought this up today, this comparison conversation between the two countries, is because number one, I'm interested, and I've always loved. I've always wanted to go to Canada. In recent years, I've always wanted to move up to Canada and retire up there somewhere in a cabin in the mountains. And the thing that struck me the most was having you in class, and amidst tons of like social movements going on, social tragedies happening, pandemic happening, an election with a highly controversial person, all happening in the last 2 years, and having your perspective in class, being from Canada, and having you speak up and just saying like, some of this stuff is horrendous, what's going on in your country. This kind of stuff would never happen in Canada. It really helped ground me and remind me that, hey, the way we do it here in America is not how they do it in other countries, that other countries actually do things a lot differently and do things a lot better in a lot of ways. And so that's really what spurred this conversation up, and what brought my interest into bringing it into our conversation today. But I want to be respectful of your time. We have about 12 minutes left, and I want to ask you about your experience in traveling between our two countries, right? You came here in, let's see, we started in 2019. So you came here to start a PhD in 2019.
Yeah.
And then all this stuff happened, right? Yeah, the pandemic especially, but all sorts of other social upheavals happened that prevented you from going back to Canada. And I can't count the number of times you would come on our Zoom calls and say, I had a plane ticket to go home, but now it's canceled, and now I don't know what's going on, and they may not, visa issues and all sorts of things. So yeah, can you share with me and with the audience sort of what was your experience in this huge long journey to get back to Canada, which you're right now in Canada and recording, and I'm so happy to see you in your home country, and I hope you can make it back. But man, what a trip.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Yeah, that's going to be a whole other trip. So, yeah, I mean, the past 2 years have been quite a journey. So, even before I came to Colorado the first time, yeah, back in August 2019, sadly, my mom had suddenly passed away just a couple months before that. So, I was already sort of in a state of mind of, okay, right, I'm leaving my widowed dad. My heart is breaking, but both my parents have always been super supportive of me, attaining this degree. So, this is very much, even to this day, I carry both of them with me, and doing this for them as well as myself. But so that was already sort of resonating, of course, on my heart. So I had one opportunity to go home in between COVID and when we first started our program. I went home for winter break. So this was right before, COVID kind of emerged. So I left in January of 2020 and said to my dad, like, don't worry, Dad, these next few months are going to go by really fast, and then I'll be back in the summer. Because, right, at this time, of course, this is the last thing anybody's thinking of. So, right, return. And then, right, COVID emerged, and, travel restrictions started to go into place naturally. So in time, Canada imposed, their own quarantine act. And a part of it was, this was only going to be open to essential people, whether it had to do with professionally or personally. There were certain criteria of kind of getting through. And it was quite, a pretty small list at that time. So I knew at that time, okay, I'm not really making this list of essential people. Like, I can go to Canada because I live there. But if I do, I will either have to pay over $2,000 to spend at a mandatory stay in a government-approved hotel to quarantine before I can go to my destination, or take a $3,000 fine if I go straight home. So, I always pride myself that, I would never put a price on my loved ones. Well, clearly I did. I am but a lowly, graduate student. This is not something that I have, extra cost to cover. And I need to really express that. I still know I'm in a very privileged position with this, because not a lot of people, again, have the type of resources that I can access. And so I want to make sure that, I understand, and I have great gratitude that, even though this was quite, a journey, I was still able to take it to come here. So on top of the COVID restrictions that were going on, I also faced the dilemma as an international student when Trump imposed that any student, because at that time, we were going hybrid, that if you were taking classes online, you were no longer considered an international student and you had to go back to your home country. So, we're in a sticky position because we're not going in person, because this is going to harm our health. But at the same time, we are now told that essentially you have to get out of the country because you're not considered either an F1 or a J1 student. So that, all of a sudden became quite terrifying, because this is now the government saying, okay, you have to get out of the country. So, that was resolved what seemed like, within a week, that no, the government took that away. Our schools and schools across the US were great in advocating for the students and saying, absolutely not, we're not agreeing to this. And so eventually in time that disappeared. But to this day, so Canadians who study in the US actually don't need a visa. But what we do have is something that's called an I-20. It's a form that stipulates, where we're doing our school, that we have the funds to cover our tuition, and this is the contact person to kind of confirm that they are enrolled in this specific program. So now with that, I also have to carry a letter that specifies to the officer, the customs officer, their U.S. customs officer, explaining to them, that just to remind them that this law has been removed, that even if it's hybrid, students are still considered students. It even stipulates on there that this document has been given to me electronically due to COVID. So, please accept it. So, the schools are doing great a job in kind of covering all your bases. But even though that has been gone in a sense, we still sort of live with that fear of, we don't know if this could change again, or if we are going to encounter an officer that maybe for whatever reason isn't educated around this. So again, it's always you're always kind of like a little wee bit of anxiety before you kind of approach that officer and kind of make your statement as to why, you need to kind of enter their country. So again, going back there with the COVID, so that gets resolved, but again, the COVID restrictions are still there. So, I just had to wait patiently. I guess it was my own stubbornness of like, I cannot justify paying this. You know, as much as I want to see, you know, my dad and my best friend and all of the, you know, my loved ones, I just got to wait this out. So luckily, or you know, unfortunately, our degree is a bit isolating in a sense that it's we're reading, we're writing. You know, I'm often kind of by myself outside of our class time. It's quite silent, so I'm just kind of have my head in the books, and so you know, was able to kind of get through that first summer, and then we were thrown back into school. So that's kind of a delightful distraction. But I started to get more of an itch after our courses kind of ended in May, because now it's the summer. This is where, again, you know, I it's my norm to spend it, you know, home in Canada. So luckily, in time at the beginning, starting July 5th, Canada opened it up and said, okay, there's this list. If you make the kind of, if you hit the check marks on here, then you're exempt from the quarantine. So at this time now, I'm eligible because I'm a student, and so they understand, okay, you're going through the border because you live here, and then you got to go back, and being fully vaccinated, and having a negative COVID test 72 hours prior to boarding. So what Canada adopted is they have an app called Can Arrive, where you have to upload all of this information, you know, your date that you're traveling, what your destination is, what your quarantine plan is, and you're uploading your vaccination record. And so I did all that. And then I made sure I had a hard copy of my COVID test, which was also quite a journey in itself. So like I said, you had to get it done 72 hours prior to boarding. So my 72 hours prior landed on July 4th. So there were no COVID testing, you know, places open naturally on that day. A lot of places took the 5th off in lieu of that as well. So I ended up having to travel. I drove an hour to get this COVID test to ensure that I had it within time prior to boarding. And luckily, you know, fabulous people there who were able to get it back to me within 24 hours. So I had, you know, security of having that. So right, you know, it can sound a bit tedious, but I understand these are safety precautions. They're not trying to let anybody in. So right, I had kind of all my ducks in an order by the time I could go. Oh, also, which also made this fun. So first, Canada said that, right, this is going to start on July 5th. So as soon as I heard July 5th, I booked a ticket. Then it later comes out, it's starting July 5th at midnight. So my original date was on July 5th, but in the afternoon. So had I stuck with that original flight, I would have had to quarantine. Like, this is how, you know, rigid they were. Like, even if you landed there just a couple hours before it went into fruition, then like you still had to go into the hotel. So that was a whole other thing. I had to cancel that ticket and then book a whole new one. So I ended up getting one just a couple days after that, just to be safe. Gosh forbid, you know, they changed the date again. But when I landed, it was pretty expedited. You know, I explained to the officer, you know, I'm Canadian, I'm just home from school. You know, there's loved ones that I want to see, and, you know, very delightful, let me through. So this past month, I've been enjoying, you know, my time here, you know, catching up with loved ones, you know, and just, you know, this is my home, and just experiencing that again, because when that option was ripped away from me, it was so difficult. And as I put on you and the rest of our lovely, you know, cohort members, you know, we would explain what's going well and what's not. And I was just a broken record. Like, I just want to go home. I want to go home, because I didn't have the freedom to, you know, that was now what I believe to be my right, which was now taken. I mean, technically, again, I could go home, but I just didn't want to pay that obnoxious fine. I felt like that was just unnecessary and really unfair. So also, again, my stubbornness kind of coming into play. So, so now that I'm here, I just want to also point out, you know, and again, not to necessarily judge, but going through the airports in Canada, because I flew between Calgary and Vancouver, they're checking my temperature. And I don't want to speak ill, but I don't recall anybody checking my temperature when I left Denver. It was, you know, everybody was wearing a mask, and, you know, security was security, but I don't recall getting my temperature taken. So that was very interesting to see here in Canada. But please don't hold that against me. I just don't have any recollection, but it was pretty apparent here when I was traveling, within Canada, that temperature checks were definitely in place. So so I'm here now. So again, what I have to ensure is that I again need to get a negative COVID test, and it has to be a PCR test. So these are the nasal swabs, so very specific ones. It can't be the saliva one. I had to pay $200 out of pocket, which is again okay, because this is what I knew I was walking into, wanting to come home. So getting affidavit or some form where I am attesting to the US that what I am saying is true, that I got a negative test, that, I'm not having symptoms. They're again just crossing their T's and dotting their I's, and ensuring that people that are coming into the country are again taking the proper precautions to make it safe for everybody. So again, I'm hoping this isn't, coming across as complaining. It was, took some time, and it was expensive, definitely my most expensive trip home, but worth it in the end. I feel quite revitalized. And this is again what we take advantage of. We just assume we're going to see that person again. Having especially gone, excuse me, almost 2 years without seeing my dad, ripping my heart into too many pieces. So, we right, when we said goodbye to each other this time, we didn't know again when we would get to see each other. So, pardon me, we made sure it was a very meaningful, much more meaningful goodbye, because we didn't want to take advantage of, what if by chance this is the last time we get to say goodbye.
Yeah, I was thank you for sharing that. I mean, what a horrendous process you had to go through. I did hear, I'll keep this short. I did hear, and I don't watch the news, so this might not be true, but I heard from somebody that Canada is much more closed off right now as far as like COVID restrictions. A lot of the US has opened back up. Is that true? I mean, you did mention the temperature taking in the airport, so that tells me that Canada is a little more concerned about the virus. And I hate those thermometer things. I refuse to let people point those at my face. I have them pointed at my wrist. But that's because I have a specific trauma from my teenage years, where I had somebody put a gun directly onto my forehead, in an aggressive manner. So having anyone put that thing like right on my forehead is triggering to me, and
And what an interesting insight. I didn't even think of that for anybody that may have experienced trauma, right, from a gun to the head.
Yeah.
You just assume like, okay, right, this is just to do with our health, and off we go. For you so you don't have to be triggered in such a heinous sense.
Well, and I go to places all the time where they just assume and put it up on your forehead, and like my initial reaction is like to duck out of the way and like slap their hand out of the way, just out of instinct, and then I ask them nicely, like, no, put that on my wrist, please. And sometimes I have to explain to them why. But this isn't about that. My question was about Canada and your restrictions with COVID. Are you guys still closed down quite a bit up there?
Somebody brought to my attention, and I guess I didn't realize it when I was there, but the airports are quite bare. You're definitely not seeing as many people traveling through, and I think a big part of it has to do with the Quarantine Act that Canada specifically has. I think still, they're not allowing flights from India and Pakistan. But it's also my understanding, I know starting August 9th or 6th, so I don't know for sure, but they'll be allowing, fully vaccinated Americans, to come in. And I think the gradual plan is to eventually let all international travelers. So hopefully, you know, the ban to India and Pakistan will also be lifted. So yeah, around traveling, what I've noticed, you know, here, regardless if masks are optional or not, most people are choosing, it looks like, to wear their mask. This is was really funny to me, but, you know, also speaks to maybe, you know, certain generations and how certain precautions that they're taking. I love my dad so much. He's one of my best friends. But when I first arrived to Calgary, he kindly asked me to sit in the back seat with my mask on. And so I just thought, like, oh, this is very interesting. But I totally understood, you know, he's in his 70s, he's in a much more vulnerable position, and family or not, he's making sure, you know, that he's definitely you know, taking precautions and taking good care of his health. And I know, absolutely, he's taking a gamble by letting me into his home. And, you know, knock on wood, hopefully I did not, you know, harm my dad in any way, you know, in order to see him. But yeah, you know, I get it. I think everybody is allotted, especially at this time, to be in their own comfort zone. So again, it's our duty to kind of protect ourselves and ensure that you know, we're hopefully being as safe as possible. But yeah, I'm not seeing sort of that freedom I was kind of when I was back in Colorado, of seeing a lot of people, a lot of places without a mask. However, with that said, my hometown of Calgary is known for something called the Calgary Stampede. This is touted as the greatest outdoor show on earth. It's a rodeo, it's a midway, you know, lots of games and good eats and all that stuff. And so they had it, you know, Calgary still had it, and people went, and I looked at pictures and there weren't masks. And yeah, so again, it's really to each their own. They were still having precautions of, you know, temperature taking and taking tests and things like that. But somehow, again, there's always something that kind of slips, and unfortunately there went to others. And so you take a gamble, right? Like I think we're all itching for that, but we also have to, I guess, understand that we're in a more of a new normal now, and there are certain things that we still need to do. This pandemic is by no means over. Even today, the CDC, you know, released that you can still get the Delta variant even if you are fully vaccinated. So we're not out of the woods yet, but I get, you know, needing that one moment of let me just feel normal again. But gosh forbid, you know, something like that, you know, comes at the cost of your health. So I think it's just a bit of a mix. But personally speaking, because I'm traveling, I'm not going out too much. My intent to kind of come here was to see loved ones. Luckily, I lived in beautiful BC for almost 10 years. So I've kind of done, you know, the sightseeing. I'm not needing to do that again. So like you mentioned before, you know, sometimes fear gets in the way of happiness. So, right, you know, I could have maybe made more opportunities to kind of go outside and do more public things. But at the same time, I'm being very mindful that I'll be returning back to the US. I'm getting a wonderful opportunity to teach students. Gosh forbid, you know, I put them in harm's way. So, you know, there's also things that are ensuring or guiding me to make sure I'm being as safe as I can, because at the end of the day, I only have control over myself. So, yeah, it really is just doing the best that you can. But yeah, I don't know that I wouldn't say as kind of free as the US, but at the same time, Canada is only kind of more recently become fully vaccinated, whereas we had a bit of a head start over there. So I'm not sure if it's more reflective of that, where it's taking them a bit more time to kind of feel okay. But you know, it might even feel like a temporary feeling, especially as this new variant is becoming more prevalent, especially in the US, that maybe it's like, oh, we can't feel that freedom just yet, because we're seeing that it's certainly not resolving.
That story about your dad was hilarious. Putting you in the backseat.
Yeah.
Like, thanks, Dad. You haven't seen me in 2 years, and now I'm subjugated to the
2 years.
Well, Shivani, I want to say
With
thank
both
you.
of our
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I want to say thank you again for taking the time out today to join the podcast, and thank you for, spending some time and talking a little bit and letting me pick your brain about end of life and about Canada, U.S. differences and your approaches to consciousness and how you help other people sort of come to terms with their own experiences of consciousness as their consciousness is about to leave their physical body. So thank you so much for coming and sharing all that with me. Yeah, I just want to say thank you.
Oh, oh, thank you. Again, this was my utmost pleasure. When you were first describing your podcast to us and you said like, oh, and I hope to have each of you on, I got excited from day one. So thank you so much, especially for your patience and kind of excuse me, making sure that we both found time in our schedule for this. And yeah, you just keep using your voice for good. This is education, it's advocacy, and it's forcing people to think about things that may be right. They didn't want to because it was making them uncomfortable, but uncomfortable is good. It's making you feel alive. And really, again, being intentional in our purpose and how we view the world, and especially how we embrace our sense of self. So I hope you and your lovely listeners just continue to take the best of care.
Yeah, well, thank you. And to all you listeners out there, thank you for listening to the show. I will leave Shivani's bio information for Colorado State University in the description for the podcast, as well as some ways that you can reach out to her and make contact if you want further information or if you want to network with her. I apologize to all you listeners out there if you're experiencing any poor audio quality. We were, I don't know, messing with a little bit of technical issues throughout the podcast, and that's been happening a little bit more to me recently. Who knows? Who knows? Maybe those conspiracy theories about COVID and 5G are coming true, and it's disrupting our internet service. Who knows? Probably not. But anyway, thanks again, Shivani, and we'll see you all later.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you.
Conversations with the Mind podcast is sponsored by mindops.com. You can find us at www.mind-ops.com. We're an eclectic counseling company providing mental health and mental performance services to individuals, small and large groups, teams, businesses, military, through face-to-face sessions or at a distance using phone or confidential video chat apps. We bring a unique Buddhist Western lens and specialize in general psychotherapy for all mental difficulties, sport and performance psychology for performance enhancement, addiction counseling for any maladaptive or destructive habits, and psychedelic integration therapy to make the most from your visionary medicine work. We are available as well for corporate workshops to address the needs of your employees' wellness.